Hi everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of my new podcast, Fred Talks. In this podcast, we will be talking about the fashion industry, why it might be more important than you would think, but why is it also less glamorous as it makes itself look. Now, I should probably introduce myself because who the heck am I to talk to you about the industry? My name's Michaela, or Misha for short. I'm a fashion journalist. I've been in the industry for past 7 years. I decided to start this podcast because I feel like there's always been two very extreme ideas or opinions on what the industry actually is. One side think that it's very useless, that it's very shallow, and it just makes you buy more and makes you feel like you're never enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not rich enough, and the other side is quite the opposite, with people thinking that those in the fashion industry are better than the others, that it's very unattainable industry, it's very hard to get into, and it's very much for the privileged people who are just these glamorous celebrities that live in the industry. Which, me working in it and living in it, I know that neither of those are true. And I think it's very much fault of the media, of us journalists, that we made fashion industry look this way. Because in one side, we really don't talk much about the fashion industry as an industry, because it is an industry. There's a lot of money in it, and there's lots of jobs in it that people just don't know about because we don't teach them. And I also think, on the other hand, we made the other extreme, making it look like, especially during the 90s, early 2000s, with Devil Wears Prada and all the, I would say it was just kind of like this cult of people thinking that the fashion industry is just very, as I said before, glamorous and very fancy and very much something for celebrities, for, you know, we made it feel like, because if you're in the front row, you're someone better, you're someone fabulous, and that is not true. And I'm saying this as someone who was in the front row. And yeah, I think it's our fault that we made it seem this way, and I want to fix it, which obviously this is very ambitious of me to say, but I think it's also important to note that this podcast will feel very schizophrenic, because in some episodes I will be talking about why is it great and why is it fun and why is it important, and in other episodes I will be talking about how is it really not so great and how it is very toxic. So what a better way to start this episode than talking about why fashion industry is actually much more important for us as a human race than we would naturally think. I know a lot of you are thinking, what the heck is she talking about? Fashion's not important to us whatsoever. But hear me out. I think the reason why we don't think the fashion is important is simply because we don't really talk about its history, right? If you look at the human evolution, of the history of the human evolution, no one talks about fashion. If we talk about the fashion history, it's always the fashion of the 18th, 19th, 17th century, but no one really talks about fashion in prehistoric times. One, it's very hard to date the beginning of fashion because of the decay of the fabric. Two, the fashion industry, as in like the term fashion and the term fashion industry, simply didn't exist. And three, there's a difference between fashion as in clothes and fashion as in style. And a lot of the books and resources that we have about the history of fashion focuses more on the style rather than the actual clothes. And that, which is the reason why then we think like, why we feel like the fashion didn't exist. No, the style wasn't so much of a thing. But the fashion itself did exist, and it was an important part of our culture. For example, anthropologist Aubrey Cannon talks about this quite a lot, and he's one of those anthropologists that believe that fashion is an important part of our culture since the beginning of the human race, pretty much. And now I know just said that there's no evidence of the fashion in the prehistoric times, but we do have evidence of jewelry. And I know some of you will argue that jewelry isn't really fashion, which is completely fair, but it is the first evidence of humans using something to change their appearance. So the question is, why would they do it? Because I can't really imagine a caveman caring about what he looks like, right? He cares about surviving, that's about it. Professor Rick Scholting explains that those jewelries that were usually made out of shells were supposed to represent the social status within the group. and that fashion is in fact one of the earliest way of communication. This can obviously be argued because a lot of people would say that at the time the purpose of fashion was probably, or more likely, to be to protect us from the environment, which is completely understandable. However, if we look into fashion later, we would see this pattern of fashion being used as a way to show the social status, most importantly, and to communicate something. For example, in a book, A Cultural History of Dress and Fashion in the Renaissance, Catherine Richardson talks about how in Renaissance, the outer appearance was an indicator of social economic position of the individual. I think a very interesting fact is that just how police nowadays use the description of the criminal, in Renaissance, they used to use the description of the criminal's clothes because the legislation insisted that the whole group of poor or of those who could be criminals should just be easily recognizable and should wear the same clothes, which most likely the case anyway. However, this worked the other way around. Fashion as a tool for recognition was very popular in elite households as well. For example, Henry VIII would provide all his servants, which would be about 1,500 men, with the same clothes, with the uniform, which would be red for coronation and black for funerals. So everyone would distinguish that they are part of his household. Another fashion-obsessed monarch was Louis XIII, who set his own rules, his own fashion rules for the entire kingdom, not just the upper class, which is very important because then if someone didn't follow the rules, they would become a figure of fun. It would even get to a point where they would be excluded from the society. All of this is great and interesting, but the only thing I've proven so far is that we took something that was meant to serve us and protect us and changed it into something that is pain in the. However, this is not the end yet. Do you remember how I was talking about Scholting and how he explains that fashion is the earliest tool for communication? We're gonna talk about biology now. And no, don't turn it off. I know, fashion biology, it's getting too complicated, it's getting too annoying. Don't you worry, I'm gonna make it fast. I've already gone through all the pain with the research because, by the way, this was my dissertation. This was the topic of my dissertation, right? So I've gone through it for you. Because if we want to talk about fashion being a fundamental part of the human experience, we need to understand what makes humans human first, which I know it sounds a bit too complicated for this to be a topic about fashion, but it's not actually as complicated as it seems. I think most of you is familiar with the Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, which is summarized as the survival of the fittest. This theory explains that organisms produce more offspring that are able to survive in the given environment, which leads to the survival of those with better physical traits. Those individuals are able to mature and reproduce, while the ones lacking the traits are designed to die before they reach the reproduction age or produce fewer offsprings. However, Darwin introduced another theory of sexual selection. In this theory, he explains that the male can become a more attractive mating partner if he has a trait that provides an extra advantage. To put it in an example, if a female has an option of 2 potential mating partners, in the case of natural selection, she would choose the one with better physical traits that would provide her with direct benefit. However, if one of the rivals has a trait that provides an advantage over the other, even if it doesn't provide benefits for the female, then we talk about sexual selection. And those traits are often linked to the outer appearance. Great example that I'm going to use here are the peacocks, or to be more specific, the peacock's tails, where according to natural selection, the peacock's tail would seem like a handicap because it makes it harder for them to fly. However, according to sexual selection, it's seen as an advantage because it shows that the individual was strong enough to survive despite having the handicap. This theory proves that the visual communication isn't solely human, but it is seen in animal world as well. However, there is a difference between how we use it, because obviously the peacock does not choose, and well, he can't really influence the way his tail looks and the way he is born with. However, we can. However, there is a difference of how we use it compared to the animals. I will use the peacock style as an example once again, because at the 2010 Victoria's Secret fashion show, model Karolina Kurkova wore these huge wings, strongly reminding of a peacock style. Why am I talking about this? If you are familiar with the Victoria's fashion shows, you know that at the time, and especially between 2000 and 2010, it was very prestige fashion show, and to be a model at the for Victoria's Secret, it meant you're one of the hottest, most beautiful women in the world. And within the brand itself, there was this hierarchy of the angels being on the top, who, if you don't know who Victoria's Secret angels are, those were the kind of brand models, the faces of the brand who would always go on the annual fashion show. And a model would be considered an angel if she wears the wing. And those angels were called angels because they always wear the iconic Victoria's Secret wings. Now, it's not really said, but it is known that the bigger and more majestic the wings, the more important the model is. Because obviously you wouldn't really put your best work on a model that's not really famous or is not associated with your brand as much. So very much Karolina Kurkova wearing these wings, which are to this day considered one of the most mesmerizing wings that Victoria's Secret has ever had, means that she was one of the top models of the brand of the time. And because of the prestige of the brand, it also means that she was one of the top models of the entire era in the entire world, which is true because Karolina Kurkova won the Model of the Year in the year 2000 and 2002. So just like the peacock, she is using the peacock style in her case, the wings, to show that she is physically fitter than most. Obviously, Karolina Kurkova didn't chose to wear it all. But somehow, just like the peacocks and animals, we are adding something to enhance ourselves and to make ourselves look more, to create a more self-positive image. Which, obviously, again, we artificially do it, or we can artificially do it. Obviously, we are born looking a certain way, but we usually use fashion to do this. And the reason why we do this is the visual communication is the first thing. If you look at someone, if you're lucky enough to be able to see, you see them, right? You look at someone and you judge. No matter what, you're a human being, you judge. If you look at someone, what do you notice first? Probably their face and what they wear. And based on what they wear, you kind of conclude whether you will get along with them or not. Because if you are a metalhead and you see a girl in head-to-toe pink, you will probably think that you're not going to have a lot in common, which obviously doesn't have to be the truth, but that is how we communicate or what we think. And that is extremely important for us humans, because the reason why we are on the top of the world, why we are on the top of the food chain, isn't because we would be any better than animals in a physical way. Actually, if you meet a lion, you're dead. Okay, I don't know about you. If I meet a lion, there's no chance I think I'm winning. But what animals don't, is the able to communicate by a language and the ability to communicate with a large group of people. It's simply because our brains somehow developed the ability to speak. And this is where our strength is coming from. If I meet a lion, there's no chance I'm surviving. If me and a group of other 10 people meet a lion, there is a high chance that the lion's not surviving. And how does this connect to fashion? You know how I was talking about how Metalhead will probably conclude that he won't get along with the girl head-to-toe pink. That is because he concluded that she's in a different social group. Now, imagine me, myself, if I was in a bar, right? And there's this guy who is really annoying to me. And he is dressed in let's say in a hoodie, in a tracksuit. okay? And I'm there alone, and there's a group of other 4 men, all in tracksuits, dressed in the same way that as the guy who's annoying me is. Or there's a group of men wearing of metalheads, let's say, and then there's a group of women wearing floral dresses. I will either go to the group of metalheads or I will go to the group of women in floral dresses, but I will not go to the group who is dressed as the same as the guy who's annoying me, because I will assume that the group will be just the same as he is and will also be annoying me. And this is very important because we use the visual communication to indicate what group we belong to, and then we can go for help, or we can go and get along with those people. And this is why fashion is important for us, because fashion for us has the function of showing the social, rather than a status, the social belongings, the membership. And that is initially something that helps us survive. So if we would look at all I went through today, yes, fashion is something that can be harmful, definitely can be harmful. It's something that we would survive without it being to the extent it is today. However, it is extremely important for us, and it is something that is solely a human thing. And yeah, I think it's also very important to note that this podcast will be very schizophrenic because on one side I will be talking about the industry being great, and on the other side I will be talking about the industry being... I think it's also very important I think it's also very important to note that this podcast will be very schizophrenic because